The last of these ideas in terms of presentation has to do, or presentations, has to do with questioning skills. How to ask a question and how to handle certain types of questions. And the first thing we like to say about that is that they go beyond, or questions go beyond mere recall. What does that mean? This is an important subject, isn't it?
Yes.
This process is important, isn't it?
Yes.
This was discovered in 1942, wasn't it? Let's move on. Okay, so we have asked a question, we have handled it, let's go on with the world. Well, those aren't very stimulating questions, are they? Not the kinds of questions we like to ask. We should build those into our courses. Now, if you're doing any tailoring, as I'm pretty sure you will, you're modifying and you're trying to put some questions in there to make people think about what they're doing, make them more than just that. And the first thing we got to remember when we're talking about asking, stimulating, clear questions is that we should always ask one question at a time. Have you ever heard those candidates they interview, especially these days? They interview and they say, well, I'd like to know da-da-da-da-da, and if that is the case, do-do-do-do-do-do-do. And then, of course, the candidate, if he or she is manipulative enough, says, that's two questions. I'll answer the first one. Legitimate way to handle it. Ask me one question at a time, or else tell me that there's a follow-up on that. Ask one question. Do you have a model for one of those at the bottom of your sheet there? It says, what, if any, are two factors or elements or components that contribute to or influence the potential outcomes? Well, that's more than one question. That's several questions, and I don't know what it all means, but you ever seen questions like that? Sure. Philosophy courses in college. They always had those questions. Always did. Actually, I took a chemistry course once where they had a question like that, too. Drove me out of natural science very quickly. That should have never happened. I could have been in a hospital right now instead of boring you here as a doctor, not as a patient. Okay, another aspect of questions is that they should be clear and easy to understand. They do not include the answer in the formulation of the question. The questions I asked before. This was invented in 1976, wasn't it? Yeah, it was. What can you say? Yes or no? That really stimulates. Provokes thought unless the objective is to test knowledge only. If all you're trying to do is find out whether or not people have the idea, fine. You know, if all you're trying to ask is, you came in that door this morning, right? Yes. Good. Then let's move on. If all you want to do is test that, well, that's legitimate also. It just depends on what your objective is. But most of us are not challenged by questions like that, and it turns us off very quickly, which diminishes our interest and therefore causes another block to learning, which is boredom. Also, the question should be related to major points in a presentation. Ask general questions. Sometimes we tend to ask questions to, as we like to call it, picking people's brains. But the question is so obscure and so remotely related to anything we want to pick that people don't see the connection, and all you do is just stand there wasting your time. To manage questions that people ask from you, or questions that you want to ask from the in the instructional setting, ask them from the group. Don't just stand there and say, you, the steps to the process are what? Name them, all 5. What does that do to us as adults? You, Jean, you mentioned before about putting people down. Yeah. Does this relate in any way to that same kind of thing?
It intimidates them.
Sure, it puts the person on the spot. And some people don't react very well to that. In fact, they freeze. I don't know, some other people seem to do very well in situations like that. I'm not one of them. I really resent it. Somebody points to me. Why would anybody want to do that in an instructional setting? Do you think there's a reason for it? Other than the ego-serving needs?
Might be done as discipline for that guy he was talking about a while ago.
You want to talk? Talk. Now.
There's another reason teachers do that a lot. Keeps,
If someone's not paying attention.
sure, keeps you awake and alert, and you don't want to look the other way because you might be next. Now, as soon as you are that stressful in a learning environment, you know where learning goes?
Yeah.
Because you're not really paying attention to the content. You're watching to see if you're going to be the next one. Not a good way to learning. We tend to say that, and yet I'm living proof that you can learn through fear. But it doesn't work very well most of the time. And it's very intimidating to adults, very demeaning. Okay, you ask the question from the group, from anyone in particular, then you pause. Give people some time to think. You call on individuals by name when they volunteer for the question. You listen to the answer. You call on different people. You might elaborate on that, on the answer. You might want to hear other people as well. Or you might want to go back to the answer somebody gave you. First and foremost, though, I'd like to stress the fact that you ask questions from groups. If nobody volunteers, you can always say, oh, come on. Who has an idea? Any idea? Throw it out. And naturally, the way people react has a lot to do with the environment, with the atmosphere that you keep in the learning environment. Are there questions from you? So far. Should have done this many a time.